Before electricity, before streetlights humming above empty roads, before glowing screens filled our nights with artificial dawn, darkness was not a temporary inconvenience. It was a presence. When the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the world did not simply grow dim. It transformed. Shapes dissolved. Distance vanished. The familiar edges of houses, trees, and hills melted into a single, endless shadow. Night was not an absence of light. It was a different state of existence, one that humans lived with for thousands of years, and in that vast, patient darkness, there was a small flame. A candle does not look like much. A thin column of wax, a simple wick, a fragile glow no brighter than a cupped hand. Today, we might see one flicker on a dinner table, or placed beside a bathtub, or lit for decoration during a quiet evening. And it feels symbolic now, decorative, optional. But for most of human history, that small flame was not decoration. It was survival. It was comfort. It was the difference between a room and a void. Imagine a night without electric light. No distant glow from cities on the horizon. No soft standby lights from appliances. No street lamps spilling pale halos onto pavement. Step outside, and the dark is immediate. Thick, physical, almost textured. Your eyes strain, but there is nothing to adjust to. The world has withdrawn. Now imagine walking back inside a home built of wood, or stone, or packed earth. The door closes. The outside darkness remains outside, but the inside is not much different. Without a flame, the room is swallowed just the same. And then, someone strikes a spark. A wick catches. A small flame forms, uncertain at first, and trembling with every movement of air. It grows, steadies, and begins to push back against the dark. Not far, not powerfully, but enough. The walls return softly. The table reappears. Hands are visible again. The flame does not conquer the darkness. It negotiates with it. This was the quiet power of a candle. For thousands of years, human life after sunset gathered itself around points of fire no larger than a finger. Families leaned closer together. Work slowed. Voices softened. Movements became careful, deliberate, shaped by the limits of light. The candle did not extend the day in the way modern lighting does. It reshaped the night into something smaller, more intimate. A circle of visibility surrounded by a vast unknown. Beyond its glow, the world waited in shadow. Inside its glow, life continued. And you might see a woman mending clothing, the needle catching glints of firelight as it moves in and out of fabric. A man carving wood, turning the piece slowly so the light can find the lines he is shaping. Children sitting close, their faces warm on one side, fading into shadow on the other. Everything within that circle of light feels closer, more fragile, more temporary, because a candle is always quietly disappearing. From the moment it is lit, it begins to die. Wax softens. The wick shortens. The flame consumes its own source of life, second by second. Time becomes visible in the slow collapse of the candle's body, in the way melted wax pools and hardens again along its sides. In a world without clocks glowing on bedside tables, without digital numbers marking the passing hours, a candle was also a measure of time. And people knew how long one would burn. They could judge the length of an evening, the span of a task, the depth of night by how much wax remained. The shrinking flame told a quiet story. But the candle did more than measure time. It shaped human behavior. It defined how long people stayed awake, how much they could do, how close they needed to be to see one another's faces. Light was never taken for granted. It had weight, cost, effort behind it. To light a candle was to use a resource that had been gathered, processed, shaped by hands. It was not a switch on the wall. It was a decision. Do we use light now, or do we save it for later? Evenings were structured around that choice. And yet, despite its fragility, the candle offered something powerful, a sense of safety, a small defiance against the overwhelming scale of night. I look into a candle flame, and you see movement that is alive but contained. It dances, but it does not run. It shifts, but it does not escape. The human eye is drawn to it instinctively. We still feel this today, sitting beside a candle on a quiet evening, watching its glow without quite knowing why it calms us. Perhaps it is because, deep in memory, that small flame meant something essential. It meant you were not alone in the dark. Outside, wind might press against the walls. Animals might move unseen beyond the reach of vision. The sky might be moonless, clouds hiding even the faint light of stars. But inside, where the candle burned, there was a boundary. Fragile, flickering, but real. The world was divided into two realms, light and everything beyond it. The candle stood at the border. Its flame was never still. It leaned with drafts, bowed when a door opened, shivered when someone walked past. Every movement in the room could be seen in the behavior of the light. In this way, the candle was not only illumination. It was a silent observer reacting to the life around it. Shadows stretched and shrank with every step. Faces changed shape as people turned their heads. Objects on shelves seemed to shift and breathe as the light moved. A simple room became a place of quiet motion and depth, far removed from the evenly lit spaces we know today. Nighttime was not flat. It was layered, alive, uncertain, and at the center of it all burned a flame no larger than a thumb. If you sit quietly and imagine such a room, you might notice how different it feels from a brightly lit space. There is no harsh clarity, no sharp corners. The world is softer, edged in gold and shadow. Sound feels louder, time feels slower. This was the environment in which people ended their days for centuries. Conversations unfolded gently because voices carried farther in the quiet. Work became careful because mistakes were easier in low light. Silence was common, not empty, but full, filled with the small sounds of fire, of breath, of night pressing against the walls. The candle did not banish darkness. It gave humans a place within it. A small island of warmth and visibility in an ocean of shadow, and that island traveled with them. From hut to castle, from monastery to ship at sea, from lonely watchtower to crowded city street. Wherever night gathered, a candle could be lit, and the ancient negotiation between light and dark would begin again. This is the story of that flame. Not of grand inventions or sudden revolutions, but of a quiet companion that stood beside humanity every night, asking for nothing more than a wick, a little wax, and the patience to burn. Before we move forward into how candles were made, how they changed over centuries, and how their light shaped daily life, it is worth lingering here for a moment, in the simple presence of a single flame in a dark room. Because for most of history, this was the final image people saw before sleep. A soft glow, a moving shadow, and the slow, steady fading of light into night, long before the candle became a quiet companion of the night, before wax was shaped around a waiting wick, before a small, steady flame could stand upright on a table. Light after sunset was far less gentle. It was larger, wilder, less predictable. For most of early human history, midnight was not something to be softened. It was something to be endured. When the sun slipped below the horizon, people did not reach for a small, portable light source. They gathered around fire shoal, the oldest and most powerful ally against the dark. But fire, in its natural form, was never subtle. A hearth fire filled the space with warmth and flickering light, but it also filled the air with smoke. Sparks rose and fell, wood cracked and shifted, shadows leapt across walls large and restless. The light was uneven, constantly moving, always tied to the fuel that fed it. Fire was life, but it was also work. Wood had to be gathered, carried, stored in dry places. A flame had to be watched, coaxed, protected from wind and rain. If it went out, relighting it was not always simple. For long stretches of history, and keeping a fire alive through the night was easier than trying to start a new one in the morning. So the earliest human nights were shaped not by small, personal lights, but by shared flames. People sat close to the hearth. They moved their tasks near it. The idea of carrying light from one room to another did not yet exist. Light belonged to a place, the place where the fire burned. But humans are rarely satisfied with what is merely possible. Over time, they began searching for ways to take light with them, to create smaller, more controlled sources of flame that could travel beyond the hearth. The earliest attempts were simple, almost experimental. In caves and early shelters, people discovered that certain materials would burn slowly when soaked in animal fat. A piece of dried moss, a twisted fiber, or a scrap of plant material dipped in grease could hold a small flame for a short time. These makeshift torches did not burn cleanly. They smoked, dripped, and sputtered. But they offered something new: portable light. Imagine holding such a primitive torch. The flame is weak and unstable. It hisses when fat melts and falls into the fire. The smoke curls upward, thick and sharp in smell. Your hand grows warm as the fire creeps closer to your grip. You must move carefully, shielding it from drafts, aware that at any moment it could fail. Still, in the deep dark of night, even this fragile light would have felt like a miracle. As human settlements grew more permanent, people began to experiment with more controlled ways of burning fat. Instead of letting grease simply drip onto a burning surface, they shaped small containers, shallow bowls made of stone, clay, or shell. These early lamps held rendered animal fat or plant oil. A piece of fiber or twisted plant stem rested in the fat, acting as a primitive wick. This was one of the earliest steps toward what would eventually become the candle. But these lamps were not yet candles. Their flame depended on liquid fuel. The wick floated or lay across the surface, drawing fat upward as it burned. When the fuel ran low, the flame faded. The containers were messy, the smoke heavy, and the light still weak. Yet something important had changed. Light was no longer only tied to a pile of wood on the floor. It could be contained in a small object, placed on a ledge, carried from one space to another. For the first time, people could bring a piece of the fire with them. In ancient homes, and these early lamps glowed quietly on low tables or niches in walls. Their light was soft and yellow, barely reaching the corners of a room. The smell of burning fat lingered constantly, mixing with the scent of smoke from the hearth and the earthy odors of packed floors and the wooden beams. Night was never fully dark, but it was never fully lit either. The world after sunset existed in gradients of shadow. In ancient Egypt, lamps made of stone or clay were common, often shaped with small spouts to hold the wick in place. Olive oil became a favored fuel in some regions, burning cleaner than animal fat, though still far from smokeless. These lamps were precious household tools. They allowed people to extend their evenings slightly, to eat, to talk, to work a little longer. But light was still limited. You did not waste it. Every drop of oil represented labor. Tending trees, harvesting fruit, pressing oil by hand. To burn it carelessly was to waste the effort of many hours. So evenings remained short. Across the ancient world, in Greece, Rome, the Middle East, and beyond, oil lamps became more refined. Potters shaped them with handles, lids, and narrow openings to protect the flame. Some were decorated, but even the most ornate lamps served the same humble purpose, holding a small, controlled fire in the darkness. Still, they flickered. They smoked. They demanded attention. If knocked over, they could spill hot oil and start dangerous fires. If the wick was not trimmed, the flame guttered and filled the room with soot. Using these lamps required care and familiarity, much like tending a hearth. And yet, compared to open flames and torches, they were a step towards something gentler. Somewhere in this long evolution, humans began to notice something about fat itself. When animal fat cooled after being melted, it hardened into a solid mass. It could hold shape. It did not always need to be liquid to burn, not if the heat of a flame could melt it slowly as it was consumed. This realization did not arrive all at once, nor in a single place. It emerged gradually through observation and repetition across different cultures and centuries. People experimenting with fat, wicks, and fire discovered that a wick surrounded by solid fuel could burn just as well as one floating in oil. The flame melted the fat around it, feeding itself in a slow, steady process. This was the quiet beginning of the candle. But before candles became common, the world relied on a mixture of these earlier lights: torches for outdoor use, hearth fires for warmth and general illumination, oil and fat lamps for smaller, more controlled light inside homes. Each had its own sound. Torches crackled and spat. Hearth fires roared and sighed as logs shifted. Oil lamps whispered, their flames barely audible but constantly moving. In the night, these sounds blended with the breathing of sleeping people, the distant calls of animals, the wind slipping through cracks in walls. Darkness was never silent. It was filled with the language of flame. Imagine walking through an ancient settlement after sunset. A few points of light glow from windows, small, unsteady, barely bright enough to reveal the shapes inside. Most homes are dark. People sleep early. Their days shaped by sunlight rather than artificial illumination. In workshops, a single lamp might burn a little longer as someone finishes a task. In temples or sacred spaces, lamps are tended carefully, their flames seen as symbols as well as tools. On ships at sea, lantern-like devices shield small flames from wind, allowing sailors to see ropes and decks in the dark. Light is precious everywhere, and yet, even as these technologies improved, they all shared a limitation. They relied on liquid fuel or large exposed flames. They could spill, they could flare up, they could be extinguished easily by wind. What people needed was something simpler, something that could stand on its own, something that would not slosh or spill, something that could be placed on a table, a shelf, a bedside, and burn quietly without constant adjustment. The solution would come in the form of a solid body of fuel wrapped around a wick. But before that form became widespread, There were centuries of small, quiet experiments. Bits of fiber dipped in fat, wicks wrapped in strips of cloth, fat poured into molds with a wick placed at the center. Some attempts failed, some worked for a short time. Knowledge spread slowly, from place to place, generation to generation. The evolution of light did not happen in sudden leaps. It moved in patient, almost invisible steps. And during all this time, the night remained what it had always been, larger than any flame. Even the brightest hearth could not light the fields beyond a house. Even the cleanest oil lamp could not chase darkness from the far corners of a room. People lived with limits. They understood that light was local, temporary, fragile. And perhaps this is why fire held such symbolic meaning across cultures. It was not just warmth or visibility. It was presence, a living force that had to be fed, protected, respected. To sit beside a flame was to feel accompanied. To lose it was to feel suddenly exposed. In this long era before the widespread use of candles, human life at night revolved around these relationships with fire. People arranged their homes around hearths. They developed routines for refilling lamps, trimming wicks, and conserving fuel. Children grew up learning how to move in low light, how to recognize objects by shape and shadow. Eyes adapted, movements slowed. Evenings were not extensions of daytime productivity. They were transitions into rest, into quiet, into sleep. Light marked the final hours of wakefulness, not an endless continuation of activity. And so, by the time the candle emerged as a common household object, humanity was already deeply familiar with living by small flames. The candle did not introduce light into the night for the first time. It refined it, softened it, made it more personal, more portable, more predictable. But before we step fully into that world of wax and wicks, it is worth remembering the long stretch of history when light was heavier, louder, and harder to control. When every flame demanded attention, when smoke was part of breathing, when darkness was never fully pushed back, only gently held at bay. Out of that smoky, flickering world, the quiet shape of the candle would soon rise. From the smoky glow of oil lamps and open hearths, from bowls of melted fat and floating wicks, a quieter idea slowly took shape. And instead of feeding a flame with liquid, what if the fuel could hold its own form? What if light could stand upright, contained, self-sustaining, and patient? The answer began, as many things did in the past, with observation. When animal fat cooled after cooking, it hardened. Left in a shallow dish overnight, it turned pale and firm. It could be cut, shaped, even held in the hand without losing its structure. And yet, when touched by a flame, it melted again, becoming liquid just long enough to feed the fire. Solid, then liquid, then light. Somewhere, long ago, someone must have noticed this quiet transformation and wondered if fire could be guided through it in a slower, more controlled way. The earliest candles were not elegant. They were practical, sometimes crude, but they worked. And that was enough. Imagine a small room, lit by the faint glow of a hearth. A pot hangs over low coals. Inside, pieces of animal fat, scraps saved from cooking, melt slowly into liquid tallow. The smell is heavy, unmistakable, not unpleasant, perhaps, to those accustomed to it, but thick and present in the air. Nearby, someone prepares the wick. Early wicks were simple. Twisted plant fibers, strips of linen, threads pulled from worn fabric. They were rolled between fingers, tightened, tested. Too loose, and the flame would burn weakly. Too tight, and it might choke. The wick was the heart of the candle, even before the candle truly existed. A string alone cannot burn for long. Fat alone cannot hold a flame without spilling. But together they formed a partnership, one drawing the other upward, feeding a steady point of fire. In the beginning, making a candle was not yet a craft. It was a household task, done when materials allowed, shaped by need rather than precision. A wick might be tied to a small stick laid across the top of a container. Melted fat was poured around it and left to cool. When hardened, the wick stood trapped in solid fuel, ready to be lit. These early molded candles were rough, uneven, sometimes full of air pockets. They bent in warm weather, cracked in the cold, but they burned. Another method emerged that would become more common: dipping. Instead of pouring fat into a mold, the wick itself was built up layer by layer. Picture a bundle of prepared wicks tied to a rod. The rod is lowered into a pot of melted tallow. The fibers disappear beneath the surface, soaking in liquid fat. When lifted out, they glisten, dripping, thinly coated. They are hung in cool air. The fat begins to set. A pale skin forms along each wick, hardening from the outside inward. Once firm enough, the rod is dipped again and again. Each dip adds another thin layer. Each cooling period allows the shape to grow. Slowly, almost invisibly, the wick thickens. A candle forms not all at once, but in patient stages, like the rings of a tree. This process is quiet, repetitive, unhurried. Dip, lift, cool, repeat. The room smells of warm fat. The air holds a faint haze. Hands move steadily, without sudden gestures. There is no rush. Rushing would only cause uneven layers, crooked shapes. Making candles demanded a kind of calm attention. Too much heat and the layers would melt away. Too little, and they would not adhere. The temperature of the room, the cooling air, even the thickness of the wick all played a role. Over time, the candles became smoother, straighter, more reliable. People learned to trim the bottoms flat so they could stand. They learned how thick a wick should be for a candle of a certain size. Knowledge passed quietly from hand to hand, generation to generation. In some places, candle making remained a household chore. In others, it grew into a trade. Tallow chandlers, candle makers, became familiar figures in towns and cities. Their workshops were simple but purposeful. Hooks lined the walls for hanging dipped candles. Large pots held melted fat, kept warm over steady heat. Floors were often hard and easy to clean because spills were common and waxy residue inevitable. The work followed a rhythm that matched the nature of the material. Fat had to be rendered first, melted and purified. This meant heating it slowly, allowing impurities to separate and be skimmed away. The clearer the tallow, the better the candle would burn. Less smoke, fewer sputters, a steadier flame. Even so, tallow candles always carried a certain scent when lit, a reminder of their origin. It was the smell of animals, of kitchens, of the practical realities of pre-industrial life. But there was another material that changed candle making forever: beeswax. Unlike animal fat, beeswax came from honeycombs, gathered from hives. It was naturally clean burning, with a faint, sweet scent. When melted, it flowed smoothly. When cooled, it formed firm, golden candles that burned brighter and with far less smoke. But beeswax was rare and valuable. It required beekeeping, patience, and careful harvesting. And for many people, beeswax candles were a luxury, reserved for churches, ceremonies, and the homes of the wealthy. Still, the process of shaping them was similar. Wicks were prepared with even greater care. The wax was melted gently, never overheated. Dipping produced candles of deep, warm color, almost glowing even before they were lit. In workshops where beeswax was used, the atmosphere felt different. The air was lighter, scented faintly of honey. The finished candles looked almost too beautiful to burn, but burn they did. Whether made of tallow or wax, every candle shared the same quiet structure. A core of fiber surrounded by solid fuel, waiting to become light. As techniques improved, molds became more common. Instead of building candles through repeated dipping, enchandlers poured melted wax or tallow into hollow tubes or carved forms with a wick stretched down the center. When cooled and removed, the candle emerged smooth and uniform. Molding allowed for faster production, more consistent shapes, and candles of varying sizes. Small ones for bedside tables, thicker ones for halls or workshops, tall tapers for churches. Even so, the slow methods never fully disappeared. There was something almost meditative about dipping candles, watching them grow a little with each layer, feeling the warmth of the pot, the cooling air against the hands. The process itself mirrored the nature of the candle's life, gradual, steady, built in layers, destined to fade. In homes, candle making could be a communal task. Families gathered scraps of fat over time, saving them for rendering. On certain days, the kitchen became a temporary workshop. Children might help twist wicks or hang dipped candles to cool. The work was messy, but familiar. Light did not come from a factory far away. It was shaped in the same spaces where meals were cooked and clothes were mended. This closeness gave candles a different meaning. They were not just tools. They were products of time, effort, and shared labor. To light one was to use something made by hands you knew, perhaps your own. Over centuries, improvements continued. Wicks were braided instead of simply twisted, allowing them to curl slightly as they burned, keeping the flame at the right size. Purification methods improved, reducing smoke. Candles became more dependable, more predictable. But even at their most refined, they remained simple at heart. A thread, a body of fuel, a flame sustained by its own quiet consumption. There is something deeply human in this design, a balance between fragility and endurance, a structure that exists only to give itself away, slowly, in light. When you hold a candle before it is lit, it feels solid, almost permanent, smooth, cool, complete. But the moment flame touches the wick, its purpose begins. It softens, bends, transforms. And yet, this transformation is not violent. It is gradual, patient, a small exchange between matter and light that can last for hours. The act of making a candle captures this patience. Nothing happens quickly. Each step depends on cooling, settling, waiting. Rushing only spoils the form. The process demands a pace that matches the quiet burn it will one day produce. Dip, lift, cool, repeat, or pour, wait, unmold, trim. Simple motions, it repeated across centuries, in kitchens and workshops, monasteries and market towns. By the time a finished candle stood upright on a table, its journey was already long. From animal or hive, to melted liquid, to solid form, to stored light waiting for darkness. And soon, that darkness would come, because candles were never made for daylight. They were born in preparation for night. When a candle is first lit, the change in a room is small, but immediate. The wick darkens, then glows. A tiny blue edge appears at its base, barely visible. Above it, a soft yellow flame rises, narrow and uncertain at first, as if testing the air. For a moment, nothing else moves. Then the light begins to work, not in a sudden burst, not like the instant brightness of modern lamps, but slowly, gently, like dawn arriving inside a single room. As shadows loosen their grip, edges return, surfaces reveal themselves in quiet tones of gold and amber. A candle does not flood a space with clarity, it offers presence. The circle of light around it is small, perhaps the size of a table, maybe a little more. Beyond that circle, darkness remains, patient and undisturbed. The candle does not try to banish it. Instead, it creates a boundary, a place where sight is possible, where hands can move with confidence, where faces can be recognized. Everything outside that boundary softens into suggestion. This limited light changed the way people experience their surroundings. In a room lit only by a candle, objects feel closer together, even when they are not. Distance shrinks. Walls seem to lean inward. Ceilings disappear into shadow. Corners become places of mystery, and holding shapes that might be furniture or tools or simply darkness itself. The world becomes layered. Near things are clear, far things dissolve. This layering shaped the rhythm of evening life. Work moved toward the light. Tasks were chosen based on what could be seen clearly. Fine stitching might be possible near the flame, but weaving or heavy work waited for daylight. Reading, if done at all, meant leaning close, eyes straining gently against the dimness. Light was not something you filled a room with. It was something you gathered around, and the quality of that light mattered. Candlelight is warm, warmer than most artificial light today. It carries a tone close to the colors of sunset, soft gold with hints of orange. This warmth changes how surfaces appear. Wood glows deeper, fabrics seem richer, skin takes on a gentle softness, as shadows smoothing sharp lines. Under candlelight, the world looks quieter, but the flame is never still. Even in a closed room, air moves, a door opens, someone shifts in a chair, a sleeve brushes past. Each movement sends a subtle current through the air, and the candle responds. The flame leans, bows, then rises again. Its shape lengthens and shortens. The light trembles, and with it, the shadows begin to move. This movement gave life to otherwise still spaces. Shadows stretched across walls like slow, silent dancers. The curve of a bowl might grow large and distorted, then shrink again. A person turning their head could send an enormous silhouette sweeping behind them. Even small gestures carried weight in the world of candlelight. Rooms were never entirely still at night. They breathed with the flame. This constant motion also affected the mind. Watching a candle is different from looking at a steady light. The eye follows the flame's small shifts. The brain relaxes into its rhythm, much as it does when watching water ripple or leaves move in wind. Perhaps this is why candlelight still feels calming today. It speaks to an ancient familiarity, a memory of evenings shaped by gentle flicker rather than harsh brightness. But the candle's light was not only visual, it carried sound and scent as well. Listen closely in a quiet room with a burning candle, and you might hear a faint whisper, the soft sound of the wick consuming itself. Occasionally, a tiny crackle as a pocket of air escapes from melting wax. The flame's voice is subtle, but present, adding to the texture of nighttime silence. There is also the smell. Tallow candles are made from animal fat, carried a heavy, earthy scent when burning. Beeswax candles released a faint sweetness, almost like warm honey. These smells mixed with the air of homes, with wood smoke, with food, with the scent of wool and linen. Night had a fragrance shaped by flame. This sensory world was very different from the clean, scentless light of electricity. Light then was not separate from the material that made it. You could see its source, smell it, hear it, feel its warmth on your hands if you leaned close. The candle made light feel alive because it was alive in a way, constantly transforming its own body into flame. As it burned, the wax near the wick melted into a small pool. The wick drew this liquid upward, where it turned into vapor and then into light. This quiet cycle repeated over and over, hour after hour, and as long as fuel remained. Watching a candle burn is watching time made visible. The body of the candle slowly changes shape, edges soften, a hollow forms around the wick. Drips may run down the side and harden again, creating frozen trails of past moments. No two burns are exactly alike. The candle records its own history in wax. In earlier centuries, people were deeply aware of this slow passing. Without clocks glowing on walls, time in the evening was measured by the candle's life. A certain candle might burn for 2 hours. Another, thicker one, might last through most of the night. People planned around this. When the candle grew short, the day was ending. Light did not ignore time. It marked it. The limitations of candlelight also shaped how people moved through space. Walking across a room with a candle in hand was an exercise in care. The flame had to be protected from drafts. One hand often shielded it, fingers curved around the light without touching it. Shadows swung with each step, walls rising and falling in brightness as the flame shifted. The path ahead was always partly hidden. The floor revealed itself only a few steps at a time. This encouraged slower movement, more attention, fewer sudden gestures. Night invited gentleness. In large spaces such as churches or halls, the effect was even more striking. A few candles might burn in a vast room, their light barely reaching the ceiling. Columns faded upward into darkness. Far walls disappeared entirely. People moved through islands of light separated by pools of shadow. The world felt larger at night, not smaller. Even familiar spaces seemed transformed, their shapes altered by darkness. What was ordinary by day became mysterious by candlelight. A doorway might look deeper, a staircase might seem steeper. The mind filled gaps with imagination. Candlelight did not just illuminate, it invited dreaming. This interplay between light and shadow influenced art, architecture, and ritual. Painters learned how to capture the softness of flame-lit scenes. Architects placed reflective surfaces where candlelight could bounce gently. Religious ceremonies used candles to create atmospheres of reverence and quiet focus. A single flame could command attention. Faces lit by candlelight appear different from those seen in daylight. The light comes from below or the side, shaping features in gentle contrast. Eyes catch small reflections. Skin glows softly. Expressions seem more intimate, more private. Conversations held by candlelight often felt deeper, perhaps because the world beyond the circle of light seemed to fall away. Distractions faded. Voices softened naturally in the quiet. In this way, the candle did not just change how things looked, it changed how people felt with one another. It gathered them inward, and yet, despite its warmth and beauty, candlelight always carried a quiet reminder of its own fragility. A sudden draft could extinguish it. A careless movement could tip it over. Wax could spill, flame could spread. Fire was still fire even in this small, controlled form. So there was always a slight awareness, a gentle caution woven into the evening. Candles were placed carefully, often in holders designed to catch drips and keep flames steady. Our wicks were trimmed to prevent smoke. Flames were watched, even as they were relied upon. Light required attention. Perhaps this attention deepened people's appreciation of it. When something is not guaranteed, it feels more precious. A candle's glow was not an endless resource. It was a gift measured in hours. And when the candle finally burned low, its light dimmed slowly. The flame shortened, flickered more often, leaned and straightened as the last of the fuel melted away. Shadows grew thicker, details faded. The room returned step by step to darkness. This gradual fading was part of the evening's rhythm. There was no sudden switch, no instant blackness, just a slow surrender of light, a quiet closing of the day. For centuries, this was how nights ended. Not with a button pressed, but with a flame that had done its work and gently disappeared. The candle gave more than light. It gave shape to darkness. It gave pace to evening. It gave warmth to faces and life to shadows. And in doing so, it changed how humans experienced the night itself. When the sun disappeared and the sky deepened into shades of blue and black, daily life did not simply stop. It slowed. It gathered inward. It moved closer to the light. In homes across centuries, in wooden cottages, stone houses, narrow city rooms, and remote farmsteads, the candle marked the beginning of a different kind of time. Daylight belonged to fields, markets, roads, and labor under the open sky. Candlelight belonged to interiors, to quiet hands, to voices lowered without being told. Evening was not an extension of work as we know it today. It was a narrowing of the world, a table pulled closer to the flame, chairs turned inward, tasks chosen carefully, based on what could be done within a small circle of light. Imagine a simple household at the end of a long day. Boots are set by the door, cloaks hang heavy with the damp of evening air. Someone lights a candle from the last glow of the hearth, cupping a hand around the newborn flame until it steadies. The candle is placed at the center of the table, and the room reshapes itself around it. Faces emerge first, foreheads warm in the glow, cheeks soften, eyes catch reflections of the flame, small golden points that move when the heads turn. Beyond the table, shelves fade into shadow. The far wall becomes a suggestion rather than a surface. The world shrinks to what matters most. A woman sits with a basket of mending, a sock turned inside out, a shirt with a seam worn thin. She leans closer to the candle, guiding needle and thread through fabric with movements learned long ago. Her hands know the rhythm even when her eyes struggle. Every so often she pauses, lifting the cloth slightly to catch the light just right. Beside her, a man sharpens a tool. A knife, perhaps, or a blade used in the fields. The metal catches a glint of flame with each slow pass of the stone. The sound is soft, steady, almost meditative. Not the loud work of daytime, but the careful maintenance that keeps tomorrow possible. Across the table, a child fights sleep, chin in hand, listening to the quiet conversation of adults. Stories unfold in low voices, not dramatic tales, but small accounts of the day. Who was seen in town, what the weather might bring. A memory from years ago retold in the comfort of familiar company. The candle stands between them all, unnoticed and essential. In wealthier homes, the scene might differ in detail, but not in feeling. A beeswax candle burns more cleanly, its light brighter and steadier. Someone reads from a book holding it close. The page glows softly, the ink dark against warm light. Words move slowly in such conditions. Reading is deliberate, almost intimate. Perhaps music drifts through the room, a quiet melody from a lute or flute, notes shaped by the hush of night. The candlelight flickers along polished wood, along the curve of an instrument, along attentive faces listening without hurry. In workshops, candles extended the usefulness of the day, but only slightly. A cobbler might finish a pair of shoes and turning them in the light to inspect stitching. A weaver might prepare threads for the next morning's work, but fine, detailed labor waited for daylight. Candlelight allowed completion, not endless continuation. In this way, the candle shaped the boundary between day and night. It did not erase darkness. It softened the transition into it. For many, evening candlelight was also a time for quiet rituals. A small prayer spoken before sleep. Hands folded, eyes lowered, flame steady nearby. The light gave a sense of presence, of something witnessed, even in solitude. In monasteries, candles burned beside manuscripts, their light falling on careful script. The scribe leaned forward, breath slow. Each letter formed in patience. Elsewhere, a mother might sit beside a cradle, watching the rise and fall of a child's breathing. The candle's glow catches the curve of a cheek, the softness of hair. Outside, wind moves through trees unseen. Inside, the room feels held, protected by a fragile ring of light. Candles were also companions in illness, a small flame burning through the night at a bedside. Its light allowed watchfulness without full wakefulness. A caregiver might doze in a chair, waking now and then to check on a fevered brow, to offer water, to adjust blankets. The candle marked the passing hours, shortening quietly as night deepened. In such moments, the candle's presence was more than practical. It was comforting, a sign that someone remained awake, that darkness had not fully claimed the room. Even in cities where homes stood close together and sounds carried through narrow streets, candlelit evenings had a shared stillness. From outside, and a passerby might see small squares of light in windows, each one flickering with its own life. Behind every glow, a different story unfolded. Meals, conversations, solitude, rest. The street itself, however, remained mostly dark. Public lighting was rare and limited for much of history. Step beyond the doorway, and the world quickly returned to shadow. A person carrying a candle outdoors shielded it carefully, aware that wind could steal the flame in an instant. Lanterns with glass or horn panels helped protect the light, but even then, visibility extended only a few steps ahead. So most people stayed indoors at night, not by rule, but by nature. The candle made interior life possible. The darkness beyond discouraged wandering. In this way, the candle shaped not only rooms, but habits. Evenings were times of stillness, reflection, on and gentle tasks. The pace of life slowed naturally, guided by the limits of light. There was also a kind of honesty in candlelight. It did not flatter in the way daylight does, nor expose in the way bright lamps can. It softened everything. Wrinkles eased into shadow. Rough walls seemed warmer. Imperfections became less sharp, more human. Under candlelight, the world felt forgiving. Perhaps this is why gatherings by candle felt intimate. A small group seated close together, sharing food or stories, experienced a sense of closeness shaped by the light itself. The darkness beyond the table created a boundary, a private space held apart from the wider world. And when the evening's tasks were done, the candle marked the approach of sleep. Someone would rise, stretch stiff limbs, and carry the candle from room to room. One by one, and people prepared for bed. The flame lit the way down narrow hallways, up steep stairs, into small chambers where beds waited, placed on a bedside table or shelf. The candle offered a final moment of wakefulness, clothes folded, a quiet thought before rest. Then, with a breath or gentle pinch of fingers, the flame was extinguished. Smoke curled upward in a thin grey line. The room fell into darkness again. For centuries, this simple act ended the day, not the hum of electricity fading, not a switch clicked off, but a living flame returning to stillness. Night closed in softly, naturally, as it had long before candles existed. In every stage of life, work, rest, care, companionship, the candle stood nearby. Rarely the focus of attention, yet shaping every movement, every choice, every quiet hour after sunset. It did not demand notice, and it simply burned. Not all candlelight was the same. To modern eyes, a candle is a candle, a small source of warmth and glow, perhaps chosen for scent or shape. But for most of history, the type of candle burning in a room revealed quiet details about the life within it. Light had levels, light had texture, light had cost. For many households, the everyday candle was made from tallow, rendered animal fat. It was practical, available, and relatively inexpensive, especially in farming communities where animals were already part of daily life. These candles did their job, but they carried the marks of their origin. When lit, a tallow candle gave off a heavier scent, faintly oily, sometimes sharp. Its flame could flicker unevenly, and if the wick was not carefully trimmed, smoke might rise in thin grey threads, darkening ceilings over time. Yet the light it gave was soft, but often unstable, bending and wavering with the smallest movement of air. Still, this was the light most people knew. It was the light of kitchens after sunset, of small rooms where families gathered, of quiet hands working mending needles or carving tools. It was a humble light, born from necessity, shaped by practicality. But elsewhere, in certain rooms, on certain nights, a different kind of candle burned. Beeswax candles were something else entirely. Their color alone set them apart. A gentle golden hue, sometimes pale, sometimes rich like honey. When lit, they burned with a steadier flame, producing far less smoke. The air around them smelled faintly sweet, not heavy. Their light seemed clearer, cleaner, almost calmer. Beeswax came from hives, gathered carefully from honeycombs, and harvesting it required patience and knowledge of bees. The process was slower than rendering animal fat, and the yield was limited. As a result, beeswax candles were more expensive, more precious. They were not everyday objects. They appeared in places where light carried meaning beyond simple function. In churches and cathedrals, beeswax candles burned near altars and along stone walls. Their steady flames reflected off polished metal and carved surfaces, giving sacred spaces a sense of quiet radiance. The cleaner burn meant less smoke, preserving the artwork and architecture that surrounded them. The light here was meant to feel pure. In the homes of the wealthy, beeswax candles might be used during special gatherings or formal meals. Their glow fell on polished tables, on fine fabrics, on faces gathered in conversation. The difference was subtle, but noticeable. The room felt lighter, less burdened by smoke or scent. Yet even in these settings, candles were never wasted. To burn a beeswax candle was still to consume something valuable. It was a decision made with awareness, not casual habit. Light remained a resource, not an assumption. This difference between tallow and beeswax created layers of experience in the night. In one home, The air might carry the familiar smell of rendered fat, the flame bending and recovering as doors opened and closed. In another, the light might seem almost still, its glow clearer, its scent barely present, but darkness remained the same everywhere. No candle, no matter how fine, could fully chase it away. Even in the grandest halls, lit by many flames, shadows lingered in high corners and deep recesses. The ceiling of a cathedral remained mostly unseen. The far end of a long table faded gently into obscurity. Expensive light improved the quality of visibility, but not its reach. This balance kept even the wealthy connected to the natural limits of night. They might enjoy brighter, cleaner light, but they still gathered close to it. They still moved carefully when carrying it. They still watched it burn down, measuring time in wax. In some regions, other materials also shaped candlelight. Spermaceti, derived from the oil of sperm whales, became popular in later centuries. It produced candles that were harder, brighter, and cleaner burning than tallow. But like beeswax, it was costly and tied to complex, labor-intensive industries. Each material carried a story. Animal fat spoke of farms and kitchens, and beeswax spoke of hives and careful harvest. Spermaceti spoke of long voyages at sea. The light in a room was connected quietly to distant places and human effort. This connection gave candlelight a weight beyond its brightness. Lighting a fine candle meant using something that had traveled, that had required time, skill, and risk to obtain. It was never entirely separate from the wider world. Yet despite these differences, the emotional experience of candlelight remained similar across social boundaries. In a small cottage with a tallow candle, a family still gathered in its glow, voices low, hands busy with simple tasks. In a grand room with beeswax tapers, conversation still unfolded within a circle of warm light, shadows soft at the edges. Light, whether humble or refined, brought people inward. It slowed the evening. It softened movement. It marked the passing hours. The contrast between types of candles was real, but it was not loud. It did not shout. It revealed itself in small ways, in the clarity of air, in the steadiness of flame, in the scent that lingered after the wick was extinguished. Perhaps the most striking difference appeared in places where many candles burned at once. In large religious ceremonies, dozens or even hundreds of beeswax candles might glow together. Their combined light created a shimmering atmosphere, reflections dancing on stone and gold. The air remained breathable, the scent faint and sweet. The effect was luminous without being harsh. Imagine standing in such a space after coming from a home lit only by tallow. The brightness would feel almost extraordinary, yet still gentle, still flickering, as still tied to the slow consumption of wax. Even abundance did not change the nature of the flame. It still trembled with draughts. It still leaned when someone passed. It still grew shorter minute by minute. Expensive light offered refinement, not transformation. This truth kept night grounded in reality. No matter how wealthy the household or how grand the setting, evening remained a time of gathering close, of working within limits, of acknowledging the slow approach of darkness. And when the candles burned low, whether humble or luxurious, the end came the same way. The flame shortened, the wick curled, the glow dimmed. In the quiet that followed, all rooms returned to shadow, equal once more in the absence of light. So while candle types marked social differences, they also shared a common destiny. Each one, regardless of origin or cost, existed to give itself away slowly, patiently, until nothing remained but a faint trail of smoke and cooling wax. Light could be refined. It could be made cleaner, steadier, brighter, but it could never escape the rhythm of burning. And in that shared rhythm, all nights, rich or poor, moved toward the same quiet darkness. There is a kind of darkness that does not feel empty, not the clean, sudden darkness that follows a switch being flipped, but the older darkness, the darkness that remains alive around a flame. In candlelight, night is not erased, it is shaped. The room becomes a landscape of two worlds, the small, warm island of visibility and the quiet ocean beyond it. Between them lies a border made of shadows, soft, moving, never quite settled. This was the true environment of evening for most of human history, not pure light, not total darkness, but the world in between. A candle does not illuminate a room evenly. It sends light outward in gentle waves, and those waves break on objects. A chair interrupts the glow. A hanging cloak drinks it in. A wooden beam catches it and throws it back in warm tones. Every surface becomes part of the candle's conversation with the night, and wherever the light cannot reach, shadow begins. In a modern room, shadows feel secondary, faint shapes under bright overhead light. In a candlelit room, shadows become the architecture. They define space, they build depth, they hold corners in their hands. Under candlelight, the ceiling often disappears first. It rises above the flame, then fades into a quiet dark that feels higher than it is. Walls retreat, doorways become tunnels. Even a small room can feel larger because the edges are not fully revealed. The mind fills what the eye cannot. This is one of the oldest effects of low light. It invites imagination. Not dramatic imagination, not fear necessarily, though fear can appear mid-tier, but a gentle uncertainty, a sense that the world is not fully declared. A candle tells you what is near, it does not promise what is far, and so the body behaves differently. Movements become careful, steps slow slightly. Hands reach out before the full arm follows. People turn their heads more often, listening as much as seeing. In this environment, sound becomes sharper. A floorboard's creak is louder. A distant cough feels closer. A small shift of fabric carries meaning. In the world of shadows, you live with heightened awareness. I'm not anxious, but attentive. This attentiveness was not constant. People grew used to it. It became normal. But it shaped the rhythm of evening, the way people sat, the way they walked, the way they arranged their homes. Objects were placed close to where light would be. The table near the candle, the tools within reach, the water jug not too far away. It was not convenient to cross a room in darkness, so the room was organized to minimize unnecessary movement after sunset. Even the shape of furniture mattered. Tall objects cast longer shadows. Hanging cloth or curtains created softer, shifting darkness. In candlelight, everything became a little more dramatic. Not because people wanted drama, but because shadow naturally exaggerates. A small bowl becomes a deep cavern of darkness inside its rim. A spoon casts a long, thin line across a table. A crack in the wall appears like a deep opening, and the candle itself, always moving. Even when the air is still, a flame breathes. It bends slightly, rises, shortens, steadies. It reacts to tiny changes in oxygen, to heat currents, to the proximity of bodies. The flame is never truly at rest, so the shadows are never truly at rest either. They stretch and contract like slow living things. A person lifts a cup, and the shadow of their hand grows enormous across the wall. then shrinks again. Someone turns their head, and their profile, nose, brow, chin, becomes a silhouette that feels ancient, almost like the shape of a figure painted on cave walls. In candlelight, people become part of the shadow world. Their faces are half revealed, half hidden. Their expressions are softened. Their eyes glow faintly with tiny reflections of flame. The line between body and darkness becomes less sharp. This half-light has a strange intimacy. It does not expose, it suggests, and suggestion is powerful. It makes a room feel private, held apart from the outside world. The darkness beyond the candle's reach becomes a curtain. It hides what is not needed. It silences distractions. It draws focus to what is close. The voice speaking, the hands moving, the food on the table, the person sitting opposite. Candlelight gathers attention the way a campfire does. It pulls the mind inward. But shadows can also create uncertainty. In a quiet house at night, your eyes might catch movement in the corner. Not a real movement, but a shifting shadow as the flame leans with a draft. And you might mistake a hanging cloak for a standing figure for a moment, until your mind corrects itself. You might look twice at a doorway that seems deeper than it should be. These small moments were common, not terrifying, simply reminders that in low light, perception becomes fluid. The world is not fixed. It changes with every flicker. This fluidity shapes storytelling as well. Many old tales are set at night, lit by candle or firelight, not only because it creates mood, but because in such light, the boundary between the real and the imagined feels thinner. A story told beside a candle enters a room that is already half made of suggestion. Shadows make stories easier to believe, or perhaps they make stories easier to feel, because candlelight does not demand that you see everything clearly. It allows the mind to drift. It allows details to soften. It creates a space where thought can slow down and become less sharp. This is why candlelit evenings could feel calmer. Not because life was easier, it often was not, but because the night naturally imposed gentleness. You could not do everything in the dark. You could not rush through tasks easily. You could not fill your world with bright stimulation. The shadows protected you from excess. They enforced simplicity. In larger spaces, the world of shadows became even more dramatic. Imagine a long corridor in a stone building. Perhaps a monastery, perhaps a castle, perhaps an old house with thick walls. A single candle carried in the hand creates a moving bubble of light. The stone around it glows briefly, then falls away into blackness as you pass. Your footsteps echo softly. The light reveals only what is immediately ahead. In such moments, the night feels vast. Even indoors, the building feels larger than it is. Every doorway is a dark opening. Every archway seems deeper. The candle feels like a small, stubborn companion, insisting on visibility even when the world resists it. And if the candle goes out, you stop. Because the darkness here is not polite. It does not allow you to keep walking confidently. You wait. You protect the flame when it returns. You move again, slower. A candle teaches respect for space. In churches, the shadows carried a different meaning. High ceilings, tall columns, wide naves. Candlelight could never fill such places. Even with many candles burning, the far reaches remained dim. Amid the sacred atmosphere of old religious spaces was shaped partly by this inability to fully illuminate them. God, mystery, reverence, these were easier to feel in a space where light did not dominate. The shadows made the architecture feel endless. Candles in such places created points of attention, an altar glowing warmly, a statue half lit, a row of small flames leading the eye forward. The rest remained quiet, unknown, vast. Even in ordinary homes, shadows changed with seasons. In winter, evenings were longer. Candles were lit earlier, burned longer, and darkness pressed closer to the windows. The flame's warmth felt more valuable. Shadows deepened as the night outside became colder and heavier. People stayed close together, drawn inward by both weather and light. In summer, nights were shorter. A candle might be lit later, and burn briefly, and extinguish sooner. The shadows felt lighter, less heavy. Windows might be open, drafts playing with the flame, making shadows move more freely. The candle responded to the world beyond the walls, and so did the shadows. There is a quiet relationship between candlelight and memory. When you remember old rooms, real rooms or imagined ones, you often remember them by their light, not by perfect detail, but by mood, warm, dim, flickering. The mind stores candlelit scenes like soft paintings where edges blur and important things stand out. The candle gives the mind permission to simplify, to choose what matters. This may be why candlelight remains comforting even now. It returns us for a moment to the ancient environment of evening, a space where the world is smaller, softer, less demanding. In the world of shadows, you do not have to see everything. You only have to see enough. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the old rhythm of night shaped by flame, the quiet crackle of a wick, the slow drip of softened wax, the gentle movement of air, and the shadows that follow it. The candle burns, the shadows move, and the night, patient and enormous, remains right where it has always been, just beyond the edge of light. As the evening deepened and the candle burned lower, the rhythm of life shifted once more. Daytime had been shaped by movement, by distance, by tasks that are reached outward into fields, streets, workshops, and markets. Evening gathered everything back inside, and now, as night settled fully, even that small circle of activity began to fold inward. The candle remained, smaller than before, and its flame steady but modest, guiding the final rituals of the day. These routines were rarely hurried. There was no bright light urging productivity, no clock glowing insistently on a wall. Time flowed more gently in candlelight, measured not in numbers but in feelings. The heaviness in the limbs, the quiet in the house, the slow shortening of the wick. In a small home, the evening meal might have ended not long ago. Bowls stacked, crumbs brushed from the table, a final sip of drink taken slowly. Someone would trim the wick if it had grown too long, steadying the flame for what remained of the night. The room felt softer now. Voices had lowered without anyone noticing when. Conversation gave way to pauses, to stretches of shared silence that felt natural rather than empty. The candle's glow warmed faces turned downward in thought or simple rest. This was the hour of small, unspoken gestures. A chair pushed back gently, a hand resting briefly on another shoulder. A quiet goodnight spoken not loudly, because the night itself encouraged gentleness. The candle might be lifted from the table, its holder cool at the base and warm near the flame. Someone would carry it carefully, one hand shielding the light from drafts as they moved through the house. This journey through darkened rooms was part of the nightly rhythm. Doorways appeared and disappeared in the moving light. Familiar objects cast new shadows as the flame passed. A hallway that seemed ordinary by day felt longer now, more intimate, as if the house itself were settling into sleep. Bedrooms in earlier centuries were often simple spaces: a bed, and perhaps a chest, a peg for hanging clothes. The candle was placed on a small shelf or table, its light turning the room into a quiet sanctuary. Outside the small circle of glow, darkness leaned close but did not intrude. Even in shared sleeping spaces, the candle created a moment of privacy. Someone might sit at the edge of the bed to remove shoes or boots, their shadow bending across the wall. Another might braid hair, fingers moving by memory more than sight. Clothing was folded carefully. Nothing was wasted, nothing thrown aside. These were not dramatic rituals. They were ordinary acts done slowly, with the day's weight easing from the body. In colder seasons, preparations for sleep included more layers, blankets shaken out, bed curtains drawn if they existed, helping hold warmth and keep out drafts. The candlelight flickered against fabric walls, turning the enclosed space into a small tent of gold within the larger darkness. For children, the candle marked the gentle boundary between wakefulness and dreams. A parent might sit beside a bed for a moment, speaking softly, telling a short story, or simply smoothing a blanket. The flame's movement drew small reflections in curious eyes. The room felt safe, held, defined by the presence of light. Eventually, the child's breathing deepened. The adult remained a moment longer, watching the candle, listening to the quiet. In monasteries and religious houses, night routines carried their own patterns. After evening prayers, candles might still burn low in cells or corridors. A monk might read a final passage by the fading light, eyes heavy, thoughts drifting. His silence in such places had a different texture, deeper, more deliberate. The candle here was a companion in contemplation as much as in rest. Elsewhere, in cities, night routines unfolded in tighter spaces. A single room might serve many purposes, beds rolled out or shared. The candle's placement mattered. It had to light the room without risking fire. Carefulness was woven into every movement. Yet despite differences in wealth or setting, the final moments before sleep shared a similar tone across centuries. The candle burned. People slowed. Night gathered close. The act of extinguishing the candle was rarely rushed. Someone would pause before doing it, perhaps glancing once more around the room, checking that doors were closed, that embers in the hearth were safe, that nothing had been forgotten, that the candle was a last guardian of awareness, holding the space between day and night. Then, with a gentle breath or a quick pinch of fingers, the flame would disappear. For a brief moment, a thread of smoke rose, silver in the lingering warmth of air. The room fell into darkness not abruptly, but naturally, as if returning to a state it had been waiting for all along. Eyes adjusted slowly. The outlines of the room softened and then dissolved. Sounds took over, the faint settling of wood, the distant call of wind, the breathing of others nearby. This was true night. Without the candle, the world contracted to touch and sound. The body lay down, muscles releasing the last of their effort. Thoughts drifted more easily in darkness, unanchored by sight. Sleep came not as an interruption, but as a continuation. And in a world shaped by candlelight, night routines were not just practical steps. They were transitions, gentle bridges between the activity of the day and the stillness of sleep. The candle guided that crossing, offering just enough light to make the passage calm, deliberate, and safe. Every evening across centuries, this quiet ceremony repeated. Light, soft movement, a final glow, and then darkness, complete and patient. embracing the house once more. A candle rarely stood at the center of attention. It was not admired the way a painting was admired, nor spoken of the way a story was told. Most of the time, it simply existed nearby, lit, present, quietly doing its work while life unfolded around it. And yet, when we look back across the centuries, we find the candle beside humanity at almost every stage of life. But it stood near beginnings. It remained through ordinary days. It lingered in moments of waiting, of hope, of sorrow. And often, it was there at the end. The candle did not mark these moments with drama. It did not demand meaning, but its steady presence became woven into the texture of human experience. In the earliest days of life, the candle might burn in a small room where a newborn rested beside a mother. Its light allowed careful hands to move gently, to check breathing, to prepare warm cloths, to watch over fragile sleep. The room felt hushed, held in a circle of warmth against the vast, uncertain night beyond the walls. The flame did not celebrate or announce. It simply illuminated the quiet miracle of a life beginning. As children grew, the candle became part of the small routines that shaped memory. And a flame on a table during a simple evening meal, a candle near a bed while a parent told a story in a low voice, the shadows on the wall, large and soft, turning gestures into quiet theater. For many, these early impressions of light and shadow formed the atmosphere of safety, the sense that night could be gentle, that darkness did not always mean danger, because a small flame could hold it back just enough. As years passed, the candle followed people into the long middle of life, into work, into companionship, into the steady repetition of days. A young person might sit by candlelight learning to read, letters emerging slowly from the page, each word an effort, each success small but meaningful. The candle leaned and flickered as breath moved in concentration. Knowledge grew in the soft glow of limited light. Elsewhere, our two people might sit together after a long day, hands resting near each other on a wooden table, speaking quietly about small hopes and ordinary worries. The candle's presence made the moment feel enclosed, private, separate from the wider world. Their faces, half in light, half in shadow, seemed more open, more honest. Candlelight had a way of drawing truth gently to the surface, not by force but by creating a space where voices softened and thoughts slowed. In such light, people often spoke more thoughtfully, perhaps because the darkness around them reminded them of the fragility of the moment. The candle was also present in times of waiting, a flame burning beside a window as someone watched for a loved one to return. A candle lit late into the night while worry kept sleep away. Its steady glow offered company when the mind would not rest. There is comfort in a flame that continues to burn when everything else is still. It suggests that time is moving, that the world has not stopped entirely, that morning will eventually come. In places of study and reflection, candles burned long into the night. Scholars, monks, and writers bent over pages, their work possible only within a narrow circle of light. The candle marked the boundary between thought and darkness, between what could be known and what remained hidden. Ink dried in its glow, words were shaped, ideas slowly formed, each one dependent on a flame that consumed itself quietly hour by hour. The candle gave its body so that thought could take shape. In gatherings of celebration, too, the candle played its quiet role. Several flames placed along a table turned a simple meal into an occasion. Light reflected in cups, in eyes, in polished surfaces. Laughter sounded softer, more intimate, held within the warm perimeter of glow. Even joy seemed gentler in candlelight. But life is not made only of beginnings and celebrations. The candle stood nearby in moments of illness and uncertainty as well. A small flame on a bedside table while someone breathed through fever. Its light allowed a watcher to move quietly in the room, to offer water, to wipe a forehead, to sit in silent presence. The candle did not heal, but it eased the loneliness of night. It told the sick person, someone is here. The light remains. In these hours, the candle's slow burning mirrored the slow passage of time itself. Each minute measured not in numbers, but in the soft shortening of wax. And eventually, for many, the candle was present at the final stage of life. A flame lit beside a bed where breathing had grown shallow. Its glow softened the room, made harsh realities gentler to look at. It gave those who remained something to focus on, a small point of steadiness in a moment when everything else felt uncertain. The candle did not change the outcome. It simply made the space feel held, accompanied, less empty. Afterward, it might burn quietly for a while longer, its light marking the space where a life had been. Then, it too would fade, leaving behind only a thin thread of smoke and a cooling shape of wax. In this way, the candle became a silent witness to the full arc of human existence. It saw faces change over years. It watched children become adults, adults grow old. It burned in moments of routine and moments of turning, in days that seemed ordinary and days that would be remembered forever. Yet through all this, it remained what it always was, a wick and a body of fuel, offering light until it was gone. Perhaps this is why candles carry such quiet symbolic weight even now. They represent time that cannot be stopped, only used. They represent presence that is gentle, not demanding. They represent the balance between light and darkness that defines so much of human experience. But long before symbolism, the candle was simply practical, a necessary companion in a world where night was deep and long. Its deeper meanings grew naturally from its daily presence, because when something stands beside you through every stage of life, you begin to see more in it than its surface form. And the candle through life was not grand. It did not announce itself. It burned beside cradles and beds, beside books and bowls, beside hands joined in comfort and in farewell. It marked no single moment as special. It simply remained, as long as wax and wick allowed, offering a small, steady light in the vastness of night. The candle has been burning for a long time now. Its shape is no longer what it was at the beginning. The smooth sides have softened. A shallow hollow has formed around the wick, where melted wax gathers and disappears. Small trails of cooled wax rest along its body like quiet memories of earlier hours. The flame is smaller, still steady, still warm, but lower, closer to the edge of its own ending. The room around it has grown quiet. Voices have faded. Movements have slowed. The tasks of the day are done, and even the small rituals of evening have passed. There is nothing left to do but sit in the presence of the light for a little while longer. This is the hour when the candle feels most itself. No longer new, no longer bright with purpose. It becomes something softer, a companion to stillness. Its glow is gentler now, less concerned with illuminating details, more content to shape a mood, a feeling of calm enclosure. Shadows deepen, but they are not unsettling. They feel like part of the room's natural breathing. The flame leans slightly, straightens, then leans again, as if tired but determined. Each movement sends a slow ripple across the walls. The ceiling remains out of reach. The corners hold their quiet darkness without resistance. The candle does not try to win against the night. It simply continues, one moment at a time. And if you look closely, you can see the wick curling at its tip, glowing faintly red beneath the yellow light. It bends toward the pool of melted wax, drawing up the last of what remains. The sound, if any, is almost too soft to hear. A faint whisper, a tiny sigh of flame. Time is visible here, not in numbers, not in ticking hands, but in the slow shortening of wax. The body of the candle gives itself away without urgency, without protest. It was always meant for this. Outside the room, night has fully settled. The world beyond the walls is vast and unseen. Wind may move through trees, clouds may cross the sky, stars may shine where no human eye is looking. But inside, there is only this small circle of warmth, this quiet island of gold in a sea of dark. And it is enough. For thousands of years, this was the final image before sleep. And not a glowing screen, not a bright ceiling light, but a single flame, moving gently, asking nothing but a little more time. The candle has followed humanity through so many evenings like this, through rooms of stone and wood, through tents and towers, through kitchens and cells and narrow city chambers. It has burned beside laughter, beside tears, beside simple silence. Now it burns beside rest. There is a comfort in watching the flame grow smaller. It tells you that the day has been used, that effort has been spent, that the time for stillness has arrived. Nothing more is expected. Nothing more needs to be done. The candle understands endings. Its light softens the transition, makes the fading feel natural rather than sudden. It prepares the room for darkness, not by vanishing at once, but by slowly lowering its voice. The pool of wax grows shallower, the flame shortens, shadows move closer but gently, like a tide returning to shore. The room does not resist. In this final stretch, every detail seems quieter. The air is still. The walls hold the last glow without reflecting much back. The candle stands in its small holder, body curved and imperfect, yet complete in its purpose. A faint scent of warm wax lingers, subtle and familiar. Then, almost without warning, the flame dips. It recovers once, briefly, rising a little, as if remembering its strength. Then it bows again, smaller than before. The wick glows red for a moment, surrounded by a thin halo of light. One more breath of flame, one more gentle flicker, and then it fades. A thin thread of smoke rises, pale and twisting, visible for only a moment before it dissolves into the dark. And the room is not shocked by the absence of light. It accepts it, as if it has been expecting this return all along. Darkness settles fully, softly, without edges. Eyes close. Breathing deepens. The night continues, vast and patient. Somewhere, in another house, another room, another century, a different candle still burns. Its flame leans and straightens, holding back darkness in its own small way. The story repeats, as it has so many times before. But here, in this room, the light has done its work. The candle rests, and the night, at last, is complete.